Hello, this will be a commentated speedrun of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order in the All Abilities category on PlayStation 5. All Abilities currently doesn't exist on the speedrun.com leaderboards. It's a community-made category of which a few people have done runs, but not enough to warrant a full leaderboard that's curated by the community. So in this first section, we're not really able to do anything gameplay wise. We're disabled from sprinting, so the fastest form of movement is just bam rolling, which you see me doing here. But luckily this segment's very short, but our objective here is just to get to this ledge as soon as possible and then grab that ledge and do what's called a drop jump, where we make inputs on the drop and jump inputs at the same time. And this causes Cal to do kind of a weird animation where he looks like he's letting go of the ledge, but he gains speed in the vertical direction, and it enables us to skip a lot of cutscenes that are tied to climbing ledges. So at the top of that ledge there's about a 30-second cutscene where you watch a ship come into the atmosphere from orbit, and that enables us to skip it, and we'll be doing that again here pretty shortly. We are able to sprint now though, even though the game doesn't really tell you that you're able to sprint until much later. So the rolling has stopped for now. And here you'll see another second drop jump where I get on top of this ledge and use it to jump to the other ledge, which avoids a pretty short little animation where the ledge that you're supposed to grab onto breaks. It only saves about a second. And then there's some minor speed tech where moving across balance beams like you just saw. If you jump, you move slightly faster than just walking across. So here we're in a crawl space. Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor make pretty heavy use of crawl spaces to gate you into certain areas to, I guess, kind of isolate you from other parts of the map. In Fallen Order, it's also pretty frequently tied to loads, but there you saw me do another drop jump to get out of bounds here, and I'm doing some out of bounds movement to skip about a minute to a minute and a half of platforming to get to this little ledge right here. And then you'll see me drop off. I grab onto this ladder and climb up the normal way to trigger this cutscene to progress to the second part of this intro planet, Braca. You saw the cutscene play out much faster than normal. That's usually over a minute long cutscene. It plays that quickly due to a PlayStation 5 exclusive glitch that mutes all game audio, which is why there's no game audio that you can hear. And it also causes cutscenes to play anywhere from about 5x to 15x speed, depending on the cutscene. It's not consistent across cutscenes. In fact, some cutscenes actually aren't sped up at all, which you'll see later. But the rate at which they play is also not consistent. We don't really understand why or how this works, but it does, and it cuts about an hour out of this run, just in the time saved that would be spent watching cutscene play out. So after that slide sequence and that cutscene, we're on this train, which is like kind of an intermission segment on this introductory planet between the first open gameplay section and the second gameplay section, which is another train that we'll get to momentarily. But to get there, we just have to trigger it. And the only way to do that is just to walk straight down this hallway and push a couple buttons on a couple doors and wait for it to put us there. That door's pretty famous in the community of people that played this casually, because if you press that button on that door 66 times, there's a little Order 66 Easter egg put there for the very patient. So here's an example of a cutscene that isn't sped up. For some reason, on the cutscenes on either side of this little clip of Second Sister getting out of her fighter are sped up, but this one just isn't. So for whatever reason, it stops right in the middle of this sped up cutscene, and we get to watch the Second Sister get out of her ship. But then just like that, the cutscene's over and we're on the train. So the train is a pretty difficult section of gameplay. This whole introductory planet actually has some of the most difficult tricks in the run. It's pretty common to get stuck here for a very long time when you're making world record attempts. But what we're going to do is make use of a glitch called a target lock jump, or TLJ, which involves jumping and using force slow or blocking with your lightsaber kind of at the apex of your jump. And if it's done correctly, which it's currently not being done correctly, but if it's done correctly, you gain a lot of momentum upward and you get a big boost to your jump, and you're able to land on top of things that you shouldn't be able to get to, like that. So now we're on top of the train, and we're going to use this to bypass all of the tutorials that the game wants us to do. It normally would teach us how to engage in combat, and would take like a minute to do that tutorial, but instead we just get to skip it. And now here we do another TLJ. This one isn't as important, but it lets us skip a little bit of climbing, so it's optimal to go for it. And now we have to hit a trigger on top of that AT-AT that loads these 4 scout troopers so that we can do another TLJ off the scout troopers to get on top of this train car. It's not as important, but it does let us avoid a crawl space. So it's a little bit faster to load them in and do a TLJ. And now here's where the game tells you that you're able to sprint. It still hasn't up to this point. It's actually kind of funny. This is supposed to be like a cat and mouse run and hide from the ship that's shooting at you, but you really can just keep sprinting all the way along the train car, and as long as you're not in the center of the train car, you won't get hit. Now here you see me go for something called a pause buffer clip, which is a glitch that we'll be using quite frequently throughout this run. I didn't get it there, but I'll explain what that is in a bit. But here I'm going to do another drop jump to get a certain angle off this ledge so that I can land out of bounds on top of this train car that's underneath the train car that we're supposed to be on. And using some tricky, clever out-of-bounds movement and sliding around on top of this out-of-bounds train car, I can skip about a minute of gameplay on top of a cutscene that, without the cutscene speed-up glitch, would take about 40 seconds. With the fast cutscene glitch, it isn't nearly as important, but we still get to avoid all that gameplay, so it saves about a minute. And now this is the last TLJ on the train. We just need to get on top of this car to avoid about an 8-second cutscene where we watch a ship fly around. And then by not hitting that cutscene, we're able to just fall off onto this slide here, which normally everything's loaded in, but because we skipped that 8-second cutscene, we don't see anything here. The slide is still there, it's just not visible. But because the PS5 loads so fast, there's a load trigger at the end of this that normally is kind of difficult to hit, but we're just gonna hit it automatically and not even have to put any effort into it, which is really convenient. And then you saw me menu to Jedi Grandmaster difficulty here because this is a boss fight, which is a scripted loss. So the fastest way to get through it is just to let her hit you on the highest difficulty, and she kills you in 5 hits, unless you have a glitched health bar, in which case she kills you in 3 hits. There is a way to consistently get a glitched health bar, but it requires some save file setup that I don't do on every run. So it took 5 hits there. And now this little segment of gameplay here is 2 cutscenes, and in between the cutscenes is this segment of Cal walking towards this instrument called a Hallig set and picking it up. And normally this would take about 7 minutes and 15 seconds from the moment the boss fight with the second sister ended up until this moment right here. But with the fast cutscenes, we've cut that down to 44 seconds, which is just amazing. That used to be a huge bathroom break and like nerve check after getting off Braca, but now you don't even have time to go get a drink anymore. So there you saw me do another TLJ to get up to this bluff early. This is actually a late game force echo you're not supposed to be able to get until a little bit later in the game. You need a couple abilities normally to get up here, which is why it's worth so much. So the skill points in this game scale depending on how many you have. The XP required to gain the next skill increases with each skill. But because we don't have any skills yet, the supposedly late game Force Echo that's normally not really going to give you that much progress towards the next skill point. Gives us almost a full level. And then we pick up a couple other Force Echoes on the way to this meditation pad, which is this game's equivalent of bonfires. And suddenly we have enough for 2 skills, which we're going to use immediately. I'm going to buy Overhead Slash and Dash Strike, which is what we really want. But Overhead Slash is a prerequisite to it. So Dash Strike is the fastest normalized method of movement in the game, other than its upgraded form. If you chain them together like you see me doing here, you can make pretty fast progress across straight line areas, or even, I mean, moving around in zigzag patterns, or trying to negotiate hallways that twist and turn and stuff like. It's just very fast. And now here's a flashback where normally you would get the wall run ability that's going to let us get to the end of this planet. As soon as you get into this flashback, you actually already have wall run. And this flashback gameplay section is loaded way above Bogano. So what we're trying to do here is get something called a launch, which is a physics glitch that, if I execute correctly, is going to send me off like that at a really high rate of speed and at a good enough angle to get to this other bluff over here, which just happens to be where I need to be in order to get BD1, who's the droid companion character in this game that gives you your heals and can open doors for you sometimes. Now we need to get BD1 because the cutscene at the end of this planet that unlocks travel to the next planet does not actually activate if you don't have BD1. So that's just the fastest way of getting wall run, which we need to progress, and because this category requires you to get all abilities, of which wall run is one. And these sorts of straight line areas right here really let you see the power of dash striking and how fast it is. It's really something. So normally that door is open before the cutscene that opens it is finished playing, but because the cutscene plays out so quickly, but the scripting for the door opening doesn't make the door speed up, we stand there and wait for a minute while the door opens. You'll see that a few more times. There are instances where cutscenes play really quickly, but certain scripted actions play out in real time. So now we've unlocked travel to Zepho, which is the largest planet in the game, and it's also where a few of our abilities are, so we need to spend a little bit of time there. But before we leave, we're going to unlock travel to another planet, which has another ability that we need, and it's also got a progression item that we actually need to beat the game. That planet is Dathomir, which we unlock by watching this cutscene over here as soon as BD1 scans this mural on the wall. So I'll talk a minute about why this category actually exists. It's kind of born out of a lot of discoveries in this game that were made very quickly that changed the any percent route pretty substantially. Any percent went from about an hour and a half at world record level to under 30 minutes in a pretty short period of time. And we were left without a category other than all bosses, which is really combat focused. We were left without a category that goes through a lot of the game and is like movement and trick focused. So I spent some time trying to figure out, okay, what kind of speedrun category rule set could I make up that would require you to basically go everywhere and do a bunch of stuff without doing everything, because we do have 100% category, which goes to every planet and gets all the abilities and stuff like that, but it's 4 hours long. So I was kind of looking for a medium length category, and the idea that I came up with is to get all abilities, which is basically every Metroidvania like progression upgrade. So all the force powers and all the BD1 abilities, and then also a couple of lightsaber upgrades. So there's a trick that I could do here to get to the tomb that I need to get to very, very quickly, called YOLO launch, that involves basically dash striking into a corner and just praying that you get a good angle and speed to come out on the other side. I will not be doing that in this run. The reason for that is because it's super inconsistent, especially on PS5. We don't really know why, but for some reason PS5 seems even less consistent than PC, which is already not super reliable. And it loses about a minute every time you fail it, at least. So alternatively, what I'll be doing is doing a pause buffer clip here into the caves. I mentioned pause buffer clipping earlier, but it's basically, we're basically inducing lag on a specific frame of the dash flip animation that will cause Cal to clip through certain doors and objects. It doesn't work on everything, but it works on most doors and some walls. But overall, a pretty broken glitch that we'll use quite a bit in this run to sequence break and get places we're not supposed to be early. Now there I did a TLJ off that Skaz to get up to this platform, which I'm not supposed to be able to access. Normally you would get here from the tomb area that I'm about to go to, but this elevator just happens to be down at the bottom in the ice caves, so we can just take this elevator up to the tomb area. And now we just need to do another PVC through this wall here to get into the ruins, which luckily didn't take me that long. So this is where we would have wound up if I had done the YOLO launch that I mentioned. So overall, it doesn't save too much time in the grand scheme of things in this run. It's one of those things that generally, if you're going for a world record and the category doesn't use it, you're only going to go for YOLO launch if you don't really have any other time save. So for example, the current world record of all bosses, which is at least a half an hour ahead of all of the competition, still doesn't use YOLO launch because it's just not worth it. The number of runs that you would lose trying to get a successful launch doesn't make its success worth it. So here I do a PBC to get out of this elevator early instead of riding it all the way down. And it also lets me get into this later section of the tomb before I should be able to. Normally there's a first section that you kind of have to go through. And now over here, we're going to do another pause buffer clip through this door to get into this room early without going through any of the tomb at all, and then do another pause buffer clip into this corner, assuming I can get the lineup correct. That looks good. Yep. And the interaction that we have to make in order to get the force push ability is right here. So we've just skipped pretty much the entirety of this tomb. So there's a little speed tech here that I've managed to get where if you push the ball back to Jaro Tapal, like right after he pushes it, you can get a little bit faster reaction from him to throw the ball at you a second time. He waited on the third throw because the ledges in the way prevented him from actually throwing the ball at me. But overall, that was pretty fast. And now I'm going to get BD1 to scan this Tomb Guardian, which is going to give me enough XP for my next skill point, which is the last skill point that I'll be using in this run. And that's just to get the improved Dash Strike, which is exactly like Dash Strike, except it goes further and it's faster. Now that's all we need to do here, so the only thing left is to get out of the tomb. And the easiest way for me to do that is to fall onto this wind grate here, and then use the wind to get out of bounds right here. And then I'll just Dash Strike back to the elevator, get in the elevator, and go back up to the surface. So we're headed back to the surface, and that's not all we need to do on this planet. There is another tomb with another force ability that we need to go get. And there's also 2 droid upgrades on this planet that we need to get, one of which is pretty close to where I am now, and the other is pretty close to the other tomb, so it works out pretty nicely in terms of routing. Now you see me jumping on this slide because it's actually a little bit faster sometimes. It's not always fast. We don't really totally understand why slides work the way they do, but sometimes you just get a really slow slide, and jumping helps you counteract that. So now here I pushed this wall down, and I did this TLJ off the Scout Trooper to get to the next droid ability, which is a Scomp Link, which in the normal game is supposed to help you open chests and doors. And because the cutscenes are sped up, these troopers haven't left, which lets me do another TLJ to get back out, where normally with cutscenes that move at normal speed, I would have to do a bunch of platforming to go all the way to the top of the monument that I was in and then get out that way, which takes, I don't know, about a minute. And now with the Scomp Link, I can get into the Imperial base on this planet. I have to kill these guys because there's some ledge climbing that I have to do here in a second, and if you don't kill them, they can kind of ruin your day by shooting you off. And anytime Cal's hanging from a ledge like this, if he gets shot, he kind of just goes, and falls. So, you don't have to kill those guys, but it's safer to do it. So at this point, even though we've skipped most of that tomb, we haven't really sequence broken anything on Zepho. All of this you're supposed to be able to do on your first trip, whether you actually do it or not. But we're about to do a sequence break that's going to put us into an area that we should not, under any circumstances, be able to get to until later on in the game. And the only thing left to do is kill this guy, because he can ruin our day and mess up the trick. So there's this laser gate here, which you can't unlock from this side. The panel to open it is on the other side. But with the power of pause buffer clips, which you see me using the PlayStation Home menu for, which adds a little bit more lag because these laser gates are really, really difficult to clip through. Luckily, I get it, I think, third try there. But the panel to unlock it is on this side. And we won't get the droid upgrade that lets us unlock it until Kashyyyk anyway, which by the time we go to Kashyyyk, we'll never be going back to this planet. So now we're in an area that we shouldn't be able to get to until Zepho 2. We have to go down this elevator because the only other way to go is to the left of the elevator, which will basically activate a cutscene that ends the second tomb early and puts us in an elevator surrounded by no collision. It's just an empty void and basically would break the game. So we have to go this way. We wanted to go this way anyway because the second droid upgrade that we need is in this area. And now here I'm just killing some troops because I have to come back this way and do a target lock jump a little bit later. So it's a little bit easier if there's as few enemies as possible. And now here I have to do another laser gate PPC to get into this room. This laser gate is weird, even as laser gates go. For whatever reason, when the enemies are spawned in this room, Cal goes way up off screen during his dash flip animation against the laser gate. Don't really understand why. So the droid upgrade is on the table right here, and I just have to kill these droids to be able to interact with it. And now, because we haven't been to Kashyyyk and we don't have the overcharge ability, which is normally what we would need to go back the intended direction, we have to do another PBC through this laser gate. And as you can see, Cal isn't going all the way up off screen anymore, but it still feels kind of weird dash flipping against this laser gate, even if it doesn't look much different from normal. There is a different feel to it that I can't really describe. But luckily that doesn't take too long. And now here I have to go back to where those troopers were and do a target lock jump to get out of bounds. And only one guy left, which is ideal. So here we're going to do a target lock jump to get out of bounds and land on some collision, if I can. This one's kind of weird sometimes. There we go. And that lets us skip another laser gate PBC and a combat encounter with a purge trooper. And now here, I think, is the first instance of a void plane PBC where we just PBC through the plane that would normally void us out and take us back to the ledge that we jumped off of. And doing that allows us to skip a boss fight with the second sister. It's the second encounter with her, including the first one on Braca. And that puts us on the path to the second tomb, where our second force ability on the planet is. But the tomb's pretty normal up to this point. We're just going through without fighting enemies as much as possible. I tried to do a cheeky little jump cancel there to grab onto the vines at a higher rate of speed, but wound up paying for it with a void out, so... Here we're going to ignore all these enemies, because killing them serves basically no purpose. And normally you're supposed to go to the left and go through this whole other section of the tomb, and it takes forever, but we're going to skip all of that by abusing the fact that on the other side of this wall there's a climbable surface. You're not supposed to be able to climb this, but for some reason the climbable surface is climbable from both sides, and because they're so close, the game just thinks that you should be able to climb that wall. And then we let go of a ledge and void out, and the game puts us on the second level of this tomb, which is after the whole segment that we skipped. And it puts us up there because we climbed up far enough and voided out in a certain way that made the game think that our last valid position was up there. So that's pretty much all there is to the first half of this tomb. We just have to get past these enemies and do a little platforming to get to the location of the ability itself. Now we're in the room with the ability. The only neat speed tech here is we're just going to do a TLJ to get up on top of the sarcophagus, which is a little bit faster than climbing. Now there's some combat that we have to go through with these enemies and then these reinforcements that come in. Ideally, this purge trooper that jumps out, you'd be able to force push off just like that so that you don't have to deal with him. Which just leaves 2 scout troopers for you to clean up. The first one that was killed before the reinforcements came in, and then that one that jumped out of the dropship. And then the cutscene activates where we get Force Pull, which is the last force ability that we need on this planet. There is one more droid upgrade that I usually forget about that we'll get right on the way out. Here we're able to just get under the door by pulling that rope instead of pulling it all the way to the place where you're supposed to attach the cable. There's just enough room to squeeze under the door. That is not the case with this one, so we do actually have to attach it. So there's nothing else for us to do in this tomb, so the idea here is that we leave the tomb as quickly as we can. And the fastest way to do that is going to be by doing a little trick shot with one of the torches that you'll see up on the second level. They're the same sort of little votive candles that I've been throwing around to melt the vines and stuff. I do have to kill this tomb guardian and the other guy on this side of the room, though, because they'll get in the way. So now those enemies are dead. Normally there's a little puzzle that you have to solve where you like you pull some ropes and move some things around and put something in a position where you can easily throw this candle at it to burn some vines. But we're just going to throw the candle at the vines and hope for the best. Kobe. So the candle hit the vines burn, and then this ball falls down, and we just have to push the ball into the little slot to to activate the elevator that lets us leave, which is sometimes a little bit harder than it sounds. So here this cutscene on the elevator plays out really quickly, but it's another instance of fast cutscenes not necessarily being useful, because the cutscene plays out quickly, but the scripting that takes the elevator from the bottom of the tomb up to the top of where the elevator is supposed to get off still moves at normal speed. So you do save a little bit of time, because in the normal game, the elevator moves slower than the cutscene, so you have to wait for the cutscene to end, and by the time the cutscene ends, the elevator's at the top and the doors open. But in this case, it's the reverse. So now we're at the top, and there's a droid upgrade that'll let us hack probe droids on this table right over here, which is conveniently placed right as we get out of the tomb. And then after that, there will be nothing left for us on this planet, so we will leave. And there's the upgrade. And now we're done. The only thing really standing in our way is yet another laser gate PBC through one of the same laser gates that we clipped through earlier to get into this area. So right here on our left is the elevator that took us down to the dig site where we got the powered zipline upgrade. And luckily I get that PBC first try, but the area that we came from is what would have triggered the cutscene that normally plays out on that elevator. And if you trigger it from that direction, which you're not supposed to be able to do, but for some reason there's a trigger there. But if you trigger it from that direction, your game is broken. But now, so acquiring Force Pull spawned a bunch of bounty hunters into the world. On Zepho specifically. There are 3 that I'm aware of. I think there's only 3. There's 2 in the ice caves that block your path back to the Mantis, and then there's 1 right here. And I think that mostly accounts for every way that you can get back to the ship normally. What these guys are just supposed to do, this is basically a scripted lost boss fight where you get the boss to, I don't know, or you fight the boss for a certain period of time, and then they stun you and kidnap you and take you to an asteroid base where you engage in gladiatorial combat against a bunch of monsters. But that's slow, and there's no abilities there, so we don't need to go there. So we're just going to PBC out of the bubble that he puts up to keep us there. And he doesn't really know what to do about that, so his boss health bar is just going to go away, and we're going to go back to the ship. And now I TLJ off this guy to get up to this ledge that skips a bunch of vine climbing. It's a little bit faster. now, so normally at the end of your first trip to Zepho, there's a boss fight with an ATST. And if you read the subtitles there, you can actually see the triggers that talk about the ATST shooting at the ship are still there. But because we got Force Pull, the ATST despawned. So we actually don't have to do that boss fight, which is convenient for us. Convenient for us for a couple reasons. First of all, because doing the boss fight takes time, and then also completing that boss fight puts a cutscene on the Mantis that, even with fast cutscenes, is pretty slow. It's about 20 seconds. So not having to watch that is very convenient. And we're off to the next planet, which is Kashyyyk. So Kashyyyk has this intro sequence, which using this category's rule set is unavoidable. We've recently figured out a way that you can skip past this using glitches that are not allowed in this category. But so for our purposes, this is required. It's about a 4-minute segment where you swim up to this AT-AT and you'll get on the AT-AT and hijack it, use it to blow up a bunch of stuff until this sequence ends. In casual gameplay, it's usually pretty fun. It's one of the action set piece moments that they really use to market the game. On repeat playthroughs, it's nowhere near as interesting. Here we'll do a quick little PBC through this wall if I can get it. And doing this allows us to skip a crawl space, which incidentally doesn't activate the enemy AI on these scout troopers, which lets us kill them a lot faster. So it's kind of a double time save there. So here we just have to hold forward on the input and progress down this straight line to this landing pad that has a bunch of Imperial troops on it, which we will then blow up a bunch of stuff on in a somewhat specific order to get a ship to take off, and then we'll destroy the ship, and then the sequence will end. Sometimes this feels semi-random because some of the things don't really blow up when they're supposed to. I don't really understand this section. There, so that's the explosion that you're looking for, and once that explosion occurs, the ship will take off in about 10 seconds. And once the ship takes off, it's vulnerable, so you just want to focus fire on it. So in this room is one of the droid upgrades that we need called Overcharge. This is what would let us take down those laser gates that we had to clip through on Zepho. But ironically, after getting Overcharge, we don't have any laser gates left in the run that we have to deactivate. So it's a pretty useless ability other than using it to activate this little terminal right here, which moves this little spinning thing. Now at the top of this climb wall here is a cutscene with Saw Gerrera that takes about a minute. That used to be kind of a run killer, because there is a skip for it, but the skip's pretty difficult and it loses about 7 seconds every time you fail it. So you can attempt it a lot and still save time over watching the cutscene, but it got to the point where it was difficult enough that a lot of us were failing it too many times to save time, so we would frequently reset to it. Or worst case scenario, you hit the cutscene and you lose a minute plus however many seconds you've already lost to failed attempts. But luckily we don't have to worry about that anymore because watching it takes about as long as one attempt at the skip. So there we did a TLJ to get out of bounds on top of this little room here, and we're going to do something called Purge Trooper Skip, which skips a bunch of combat going down a hallway and a big encounter with like a mini boss. By doing a dash strike at that specific angle, we hit this load trigger that loads this room beyond where the Purge Trooper is, which lets us skip that entire hallway and all that combat. On PS5, it actually requires toggling to quality mode, which reduces the frame rate to 30 FPS. The frame rate isn't really the important part, but the game takes slightly longer to load the higher resolution textures and assets in quality mode, and that slightly longer load time is what's important. Because on performance mode, basically when you hit that load trigger, the next area just loads instantly, and it doesn't give you the opportunity to be in a position where you can clip into the room. Normally when the pipes load in right next to you, they'll kind of push you in the correct direction, but on performance mode, not really the case. And now this is probably the hardest trick in the game, actually. You need to do this TLJ off this stormtrooper to get onto this ledge that is next to an area that'll take us to the second major part of the planet. But yeah, you need really good height on your TLJ, and you need to recognize instantly when you've gotten a sufficiently high TLJ and hold backwards. Otherwise, you'll just barely miss the ledge, but that saves a little bit over a minute. So here we'll do another Void Plane PBC to get out of bounds below the map. And this will enable us to get to the Shadowlands a little bit faster. As long as we don't get lost in the super dark out of bounds section here. So now here I've gotten pretty much where I need to be, and right at the edge of this little ledge is a loading trigger that loads the second area, the Shadowlands. So by jumping off and photo moding there, letting the area load, we're able to just jump right into the map again. So what you might notice is that I'm not dash striking constantly. There's a reason for that. So dash striking uses force because it is technically a force attack. It doesn't use any force when you're not in combat. So when we are in combat, we're somewhat limited on how many dash strikes we can do. It's one of the reasons that you saw me kill enemies before Lasergate PBCs, because it winds up being faster on repeated Lasergate PBC attempts to just kill enemies and be able to spam the dash strike than it is to sit there and try to wait for your force to come back, and then also have the potential of enemies hitting you and interrupting you. So down at the bottom, you can see my force deplete pretty much every time I do a dash strike when I'm in combat with something. So this is a cheeky skip that's fairly difficult to do consistently, but by doing a dash strike into that lung plant, I'm able to skip past a swimming sequence, and then there's a way to get a dash strike across that lung plant that takes me up to this platform here, but I wasn't able to do that. So I just had to do a little backup TLJ off that big spider over there. And now here we're at our second ability, which is the underwater breather. This is another instance of getting the ability instantly when you interact with something. So kind of like wall run, where we got wall run instantly when we got put into the flashback. We have underwater breather as soon as we interact with that cutscene. And that cutscene isn't sped up. So the fastest way to get through it actually is just to quit out, which puts us back here at that save point with underwater breather and the ability to dive. Right here is my favorite skip in the whole game. Not because it's particularly difficult or interesting, but just this simple little dash flip up this ledge skips over a minute, probably, of platforming and climbing on vines. And it also avoids an enemy trigger, which prevents enemies that are up on that area from spawning. It's a really cool little trick that you don't really appreciate, I guess, unless you've run the game. So here at the end of this platform right there is a cutscene trigger with the ninth sister, which we can avoid by doing a little dash flip out of bounds to get onto the slide without interacting with it. With fast cutscenes, it doesn't take too long, and it's also something that you can skip with a PBC. There's a variety of ways to skip it. And even if you fail all of them, it really doesn't take that long to just watch the cutscene. But that dash flip is kind of a residual piece of tech from before we had fast cutscenes, and doing the PBC to skip it was really risky because failing it meant losing all of the time that you had spent trying to skip it, plus all of the time that it took to watch the cutscene. Whereas if you fail that dash flip out of bounds, you can repeatedly try it over and over again. Whereas the PBC, you can only really fail once, and then you never get to attempt it again. This is another one of those kind of action set piece moments that are really there to like sell the game and make you feel like, oh, really cool. Somehow way less cool without game audio or music. Now this TLJ off the Firefly there lets us skip some platforming and vine climbing to get up to that lung plant about 30 seconds faster than we otherwise would be able to, so it's a nice little trick. And now here is the first and only, I think, force ability that we get on Kashyyyk, called Jedi Flip, which is going to let us... Sorry, so there's a PBC that you can do there at that first lung plant that for some reason triggers the flashback early, but for some reason I didn't get it there. But so here we'll get Jedi Flip, which is just a double jump. In typical speedruns, one of the most broken abilities that we can get, because it enables you to fly using some other glitchy tech. So on PC, you can just double jump kind of infinitely if you reset your jump with a force slow. And then on consoles, there's other ways to do it because that method was patched. This category, however, does not allow flying for kind of a meta reason. If we were to allow flying in the all abilities speedrun, it would change the route pretty significantly. Basically, the optimum route would be to do the first part of Zepho where you get force push and unlock travel to Kashyyyk, and then immediately go to Kashyyyk, do all of it, and then go back to Zepho a second time and do basically the Zepho 2 stuff. And then it would kind of alter it would alter the rest of the game in slightly less major ways. The reason that's a bad thing is because that's basically the all bosses route. And what I wanted when I thought up the rule set for this category was something that was movement focused with a lot of tricks and glitches, and median length. Whereas all bosses is not as movement focused. It's still important, but not as important as it would be in this category, because all bosses has flying, so you a lot of the time are not moving conventionally. And my thought was, if you're gonna do the all bosses route, why wouldn't you just run all bosses? For kind of that meta reason, flying is not allowed in all abilities. So they're interacting with the bird, makes the bird move over to this branch where we're able to interact with this cutscene and get on. And this is another one of the cutscenes that is not sped up at all. We're not really sure why. So here we get the double-bladed lightsaber, which is a required upgrade because it does show up on the abilities menu. There's actually 3 locations where you can get the double-bladed lightsaber. One is on Bogano, but to get that lightsaber upgrade on Bogano 1 would require us to go about a minute out of our way. And there's another one on Dathomir, which we could get. It's pretty close to where we need to be, but we don't go to Dathomir until after we've already gotten this one, so it just makes sense to get it here. And so here we quit out at the beginning of the Ninth Sister boss fight because the initial cutscene that leads into that boss fight is another one of the ones that isn't sped up. So it's faster to just quit out, and we respawn at this med pad right here. And quitting out also enables us to get this drop attack on Ninth Sister, which does a pretty big chunk of damage. So the strategy for this boss fight is going to be hitting her basically 2 times, and then not hitting her a 3rd time in each combo, because if you hit her a 3rd time, she'll parry you. And we don't really want to get parried, because at certain health intervals, her parrying you will initiate a quick time event, where basically you clash with your lightsabers, and those take a while. So we want to avoid those. In certain situations like there where she did that ground slam, you can hit her 3 or 4 times and get away with it, because she's locked into her wind up animation, so she won't parry you. But there I got a little carried away and hit her 3 times right at the end, which gave me a lightsaber clash quick time event. But right at the end, overall that was a pretty decent fight. And so now Harry this bird drops us off right at the beginning of the Shadowlands, and there are certain other speedrun categories that don't have powered zipline at this point that can just warp back to the Imperial facility. Because there's a load trigger at the beginning of the Shadowlands that basically just checks to see if you have powered zipline, and if you don't, it warps you back to the facility. But because we do have powered zipline, we have to go back the normal way. So this is about a minute of extra movement due to the route that we take doing all of Zepho in one trip. But still not super inconvenient. We're already at the point where the other load trigger would have warped us to. So right on the other side of this door here is normally where you get warped to. We do unfortunately have to push this button and wait for this elevator though, because the only other way back up to the facility is to fly, which we're not allowed to do. And so the only other thing that we have to do on the way back to the ship is get the final upgrade on the planet, which is the upgrade for BD-1 that allows us to hack security droids. And then after that, we can return to the Mantis, which will require us to TLJ off of these scout troopers on top of this hallway here, just like we did earlier before Purge Trooper Skip. Because if we tried to go through the hallway normally, the door out to this area here is actually locked from this side. So we have to go out of bounds on top of the hallway in order to get to this area. And now here I hit this little cutscene trigger that I had done a PBC to skip on the way in, but I think I kind of just forgot that it was there until it was too late. So you have to skip it both times in order to get the full time save. And now here there's just a brief little cutscene after killing the Ninth Sister when you get back to the Mantis. I say brief, but it's only brief due to the fast cutscene glitch. This used to be, I think, about 90 seconds. And now we're off to Dathomir. So Dathomir is an interesting planet that we'll be skipping about 90% of. There's one trick very near the beginning of the planet that lets you skip the vast majority of it. And I will leave that for you to discover. So here, right at the beginning of Dathomir, is one of the oldest tricks in Jedi Fallen Order speedrunning, actually, where we jump on top of these vines in order to get on top of this ledge. That lets us skip a bunch of vine climbing and some combat and platforming that we would normally need to go through in order to get up here where the spiders are and progress forward. And here's this first cutscene where we're introduced to Night Sister Marin. Normally it takes about a minute, but with fast cutscenes it's about 4 or 5 seconds. There is a pause buffer clip that we can do to skip it, but it takes almost as long to watch the cutscenes as it takes to do a pause buffer clip, so generally not even worth going for. And now I did another pause buffer clip right down there by that bonfire in order to prevent a few things ahead of me from loading. One of the things that I want to avoid loading is an NPC standing on this platform right here that would normally have a cutscene that we would have to watch and activate. And now here, normally where you're supposed to interact with the wall and fall down into the swamps of Dathomir, where the majority of the planet actually is, we can just do this TLJ off this Night Brother in order to get up to the tomb early without climbing claws and skip 90% of the planet. Now you may be wondering how are we getting all abilities if we're not getting climbing claws? Because climbing claws are an ability. They show up on the abilities menu. And the reason that we're able to do that is we're going to activate this Order 66 flashback sequence here, which is just a few minutes of going through like a memory sequence of Order 66. But after Order 66, Cal automatically has climbing claws equipped in cutscenes. So the game just gives them to you automatically, so we'll be able to use them without actually going to the actual location of climbing claws and getting them the conventional way. And you'll be able to see that as soon as we get to the next planet. We'll need climbing claws to climb an ice wall, and we'll move at the correct speed that Cal's supposed to move at when he has climbing claws, and if I were to open the ability menu, you would see climbing claws there. So there is a faster way actually to do Order 66 that involves skipping really this entire flashback. You don't even go into the flashback. There's a bunch of weird out-of-bounds PBCs and trickery on Dathomir that lets you trick the game kind of into thinking that you've done everything. And you'll be able to get into the final flashback after Order 66 where Cal breaks his lightsaber, which unlocks Ilum, which we need to go to. I didn't know about that at the time that I did this run, so this is just a casual Order 66 done as quickly as possible. So now here, Order 66 is over, and we just have this little dream sequence fight with an invincible Jaro Tapal. A lot of people don't know how to get through this very quickly, but it's really just tied to how many times you hit Jaro Tapal. So the fastest way to get through it is to pull out the double-bladed lightsaber, which has the fastest attacks, and just spam attack him until the cutscene triggers. So now here, we just want to get back to the ship, but we don't want to open this door, and the reason for that is opening that door will activate a cutscene where Night Sister Marin raises a bunch of Night Sister zombies, and Dathomir turns into basically a zombie apocalypse. The reason that we don't want to do that is because watching that cutscene will activate another cutscene on the Mantis, which normally is just some exposition between Cal and Seer, and gives you some character background on Seer, and while the cutscene's playing, you travel to Ilum. For whatever reason, when fast cutscenes are active on PS5, you travel not to Ilum, but instead to Bogano. And you travel to Bogano with Dathomir still loaded, so you get a glitch that's called Planet Fusion, which is actually, this is actually how that glitch was discovered, by watching these cutscenes with the fast cutscene glitch active. The reason that you don't want that, there's two reasons actually. First of all is that Planet Fusion is not allowed in all abilities, because if it was, there would be a faster route. And second of all, you don't want to do that because by traveling to Bogano when you want to travel to Ilum, you would then just have to travel to Ilum manually, which loses about a minute. So Ilum's actually an interesting planet in rule sets where you're not allowed to fly. There is a way to get to the split saber upgrade that we need on this planet pretty quickly with flying, but because we're on console, we can't fly without our lightsaber, which is currently broken. And the way that we fix it is getting to the split saber, so it's not something we're able to do on console, but PC can fly to the split saber room very quickly. And now rolling backwards through the blizzard lets Cal move a little bit faster than he normally would be able to. Like, sprinting is faster than rolling, but because the wind in the blizzard disables our sprint, rolling becomes faster again. And now there's a cheeky little geometry abuse that you can use to get up this ice wall, which skips a crawl space and some climbing. It's a little bit difficult though, so sometimes you struggle with it. Ilum has a tendency to be my arch nemesis when it comes to these geometry abuses. There's another one coming up that's a little bit easier. But luckily it didn't take me too long there, and we just go up this ice wall and we're heading into the Jedi Temple. So there is a way to skip this puzzle, involving clipping out of bounds and getting past the ice that the puzzle would normally melt, but I never learned that skip, so we're not going to do that. It doesn't take very long to solve the puzzle anyway if you know how to do it. So, not a huge deal. So this is the other geometry abuse on Ilum that lets us skip a pretty good portion of this cave segment, actually. When I say it's a little bit easier, I mean it's still somewhat difficult, but luckily I get it pretty quickly there. So you get that ledge grab, and that's pretty much the end of it. That saves a little bit over a minute. Now, so in older routes that went to Ilum, there was a really big, long, convoluted trick that enabled us to skip the 5-minute cutscene where Cal gets the split saber and just get straight into the split saber room and get the upgrade without watching that cutscene. But the setup for it takes about 2 minutes, so it's, if you do everything perfectly, it's about a net time save of 3 minutes. With the fast cutscenes, however, this 5-minute cutscene is going to play out in about 18 seconds, so not something that we're really worried about. Now here we get our split saber upgrade, and we're able to pick the color of our lightsaber crystal that we end the game with. I think I go with orange here. And now there's literally nothing else for us to do on this planet. That's the only upgrade, so we just want to get back to the Mantis as quickly as possible. The best way to do that is going to be with some tricky out-of-bounds movement, starting with this little segment right here. So you'll see me brush against this door up here to hit a loading trigger that loads part of the ice cave behind me. And then I'll do a falling dash strike out of bounds here, and I missed the ledge that I'm supposed to land on. You don't have to go back up to this door every time, but it's a nice way to manipulate the stormtroopers to kind of get out of your way, because if you keep trying to repeatedly do this dash strike over and over again, they can kind of ruin your day. But luckily I get it second try here. I don't remember if everything here goes perfectly. So there's a bunch of void planes here out of bounds that I have to avoid. It looks like everything goes okay here. So yeah, there's a bunch of void planes that I have to avoid with this out of bounds swimming section. And if you do void out in that out of bounds segment, actually, if you void out anywhere here up until here in a moment, you're going to see the textures load in right here. So if you void out at any point prior to that, you go back to that area with all the scout troopers right after you got the split saber. So potentially, depending on where you void, a huge time loss. So I kill that guy just to get out of combat so that I can dash strike down this hallway here. And now we'll swim back to the entrance of the temple. So now normally at the end of Ilum, there's kind of a boss fight. It's not really a boss. There's no boss health bar. But there's 2 ATSTs that are in this big arena here that you have to fight. We're going to avoid spawning them by pulling this scout trooper way past his leash radius, which deactivates his enemy AI. When you pull an enemy outside their normal leash range, they don't really want to do anything except go back to where they're supposed to be. So they don't attack you, and it makes it pretty convenient to use them for TLJs and other tricks like that. So I'm going to TLJ off that guy up to this out-of-bounds area, and then fall into the arena where normally I'd be fighting the ATSTs, but because I skipped their load trigger, they do not exist. And skipping their load trigger prevents the Mantis from going into lockdown. So the ramp here lowers where normally you would have to kill the ATSTs in order to get on the Mantis. And that's Ilum. And now we go back to Dathomir. Dathomir 2 is pretty straightforward. All we have to do is go back to the tomb where we broke our lightsaber. There's a boss fight that we have to go through because we aren't able to fly, which is the only way to skip it. And then there's a progression story item at the end of the tomb that we have to interact with in order to interact with an item on Pagano 2. So there's a sequence of events that you have to go through to beat the game normally, without certain glitches that are not allowed in this category. Basically, the sequence of events that you have to go through is you have to get Force Push on Zepho, which creates this item on Pagano that you can interact with if you have the Astrium, which is the story item that we're going to pick up on Dathomir. So once you have Force Push and the Astrium, you can interact with the Vault on Pagano, which unlocks a flashback sequence. And in that flashback sequence, we're going to interact with a holocron. And interacting with that holocron will activate a cutscene on the Mantis on Pagano 2 that unlocks travel to Nur, which is the final planet. So without these broken glitches, that's the sequence that you have to go through, and that's what this category does. And now because I didn't successfully skip the spawn trigger for this old man cutscene, the old man is there where he wasn't before. Normally you would watch that cutscene on Dathomir 1, but I skipped it. You do have to skip it again, and I failed to do it that time, so lose a little bit of time there. And now here, because we have climbing claws, we don't have to TLJ off those Knight Brothers. We're able to just climb up the wall. So here's one of the other required boss fights in this category. Required because we're not able to skip it anyway. However, Split Saber is a pretty overpowered form of combat, and it gives us access to this double-bladed Split Saber Strike, which is the highest DPS ability in the game. As you can see, I just chunked like, I don't know, a sixth of Malikos' entire health bar. So basically the idea is that we just want to spam that. Sometimes he doesn't really let us do it. He'll force push us and interrupt us and stuff like that. But the fastest way to fight this guy is just spam Split Saber Strike as much as possible and hope he doesn't prevent you from doing that efficiently. If you looked really close, you might have noticed that Marin has no hair in that sped up cutscene, and she won't have hair in the other sped up cutscenes that we're gonna see her in. She was wearing a hood there. I'm not entirely sure why, but Marin's hair is kind of a community meme. So when she has her hood on, her hair isn't loaded. And for whatever reason, the cutscene where you watch her raise the dead is what changes Marin's model from the one that normally has the hood on to the one that doesn't. So because we didn't watch that cutscene, she won't have hair anytime her hood's down. Kind of weird, but a nice meme. But so we've got the Astrium. There's nothing left for us to do on this planet, so it's just straight back to the Mantis. And now, because Malikos is dead, we can actually open this door. Which is why you see me try to PBC it once, and then once I fail, I just say, okay, whatever, and open the door. So yeah, here you see Bald Marin in the cutscene. I don't know if she'll show up on the Mantis when we're traveling back to Bogano, but I am pretty sure she's got her hood on. Yeah. We're getting pretty near the end here. The only things we have left to do are unlock travel to Nur on the final planet, and then go do Nur as fast as possible. So Bogano 2 is just going to entail getting to the vault, which is where we first unlock travel to Zepho. And there's a flashback sequence there that will give us everything we need in order to progress. we'll be taking a somewhat different route than we took to get there the first time. Because the first time we had stuff to get along the way, whereas now we really don't, so we're just going to go straight there. So there there's an enemy that pops up out of the ground sometimes there that you can get into combat with if you're too high up on the wall run platform. So that's what you saw me get into combat there that stopped me from dash striking a little bit. So here in the center of the room is this interactable object that is put there when you get force push, and you are able to interact with it once you have the astrium. Without force push, even if you had the astrium, you wouldn't be able to interact with anything in this room, which is why for quite a long time we always thought that the fastest way to get through the game was going to be some version of Bracca, Bogano 1, Zepho, Dathomir, Bogano 2, Nur. But oh how wrong we were. The current any percent route goes, let's see, Bracca, Bogano, Zepho, Nur. Normally you don't have to hurry up that much to get to this point, because the guy talks as fast as he's gonna talk, and going fast using speed tech doesn't make him talk any faster, so you have to wait for him to get done yapping. But with the fast cutscenes, for some reason he yaps really fast. So you do actually want to dash strike down that hallway as quickly as you can. So here during these this flashback, there's these triggers that we hit that well, it loads certain scenes that Cal is supposed to watch during the flashback, but you can get out of, and it puts these walls up around you, but you can get out of these walls with PDCs, which is what I'm trying to do. They're kind of hard to get out of though, so I don't think I have very much success with it here. So at that point, I pretty much just gave up and watched the cutscene play out. And now there's the holocron that we have to interact with in order to activate a cutscene on the Mantis that'll unlock travel to Nur. So at this point, we just want to get out of the flashback and go back to the ship. Now, most categories aren't really capable of doing this, but because we have powered zipline, we're able to take a pretty fast route back to the Mantis by just moving traditionally without really using any speed tech, just use the powered zipline. And now here I fell down. This is a mistake, but luckily these stormtroopers are here, which lets me TLJ back up to the platform where I was trying to jump to, so it's not that big a deal. I did panic a little bit there, like, oh my god, what do I do now? Because there is a cutscene that I have to avoid on that other bluff, so missing that jump is actually kind of bad if those stormtroopers weren't there. This other bluff has this cutscene that normally is the map tutorial. It teaches you how to use the game's like holomap. But because I skipped wall run, or I did that launch on Bogano 1 to get out of the wall run flashback, that actually causes my map to be unusable for the entire game. The only way I could look at a map is using the galaxy map, the holotable right here on the Mantis. So if I was to hit that cutscene, it would actually soft lock me. But anyway, Nur's unlocked, and we are off to the final planet. Other platforms will frequently quit out to skip the cutscene that does the intro to Nur. But because of the fast cutscenes, it's actually faster not to. And because we have Underwater Breather, we're able to not skip it. There are categories that don't get Underwater Breather that are required to quit out to skip that, because if you don't skip it and you don't have Underwater Breather, you're kind of stuck underwater with a bad camera angle that doesn't really let you move, so you kind of have to quit out. But in this category, Nur is pretty straightforward. We're just gonna swim into the facility normally, right here, and we're gonna do a quick TLJ to get out of bounds on top of the hallway that normally we would go down. We actually can't fight these guys conventionally, because if we kill all the guys in this room, it'll trigger a cutscene that again makes us look at our map, which is a soft lock in this category because we don't have a map. So we TLJ up here to get out of bounds. And we're just gonna dash strike as often as we can down this hallway in order to progress. We're not able to chain dash here because we're close enough to the enemies that are in the hallway to be quote-unquote in combat with them. So we have to dash strike and then jump cancel to try to conserve as much momentum as we can, and then wait for our force to recharge. And so here there's some invisible water that Cal gets into contact with and starts swimming. And it ends right at the end of this hallway here. So what I'm trying to do is get out of the water, but still have just a little bit of ledge underneath me, just like that. And then I'll jump into this room, I photo mode, and then I move the camera over here to hit this trigger, which is the only trigger in the game, the only load trigger in the game that you can interact with just the camera and have it load the area. Most other load triggers, Cal actually has to hit himself, but for whatever reason, you can hit that one with the camera and it loads this room, which skips a huge section of gameplay and combat. It's basically the entire planet, right? So you skip that hallway with all that combat. You skip the dojo, which is like a 5-phase combat encounter that's supposed to be really difficult on the higher difficulties with a bunch of purge troopers and rocket troopers and security droids and really annoying enemies. And then you skip that entire room that we just went through, because when you clip into it that way, the enemy AI doesn't activate, so the enemies aren't aggroed onto you. And we're able to just clip into the elevator at the end of the room and get into this area with the bridges. So here, that was a mistake, that save. There's a boss in this next room that I don't really want to fight because it takes forever. So what I'm going to do is something called an airwalk, where I kind of layer animations on top of each other and try to interact with that bonfire. And layering the animations kind of delays the interaction with the bonfire as long as I hold block, which is why you see Cal blocking. And I continue to hold block until I get into this room and I see that kind of cylindrical thing on the ceiling there. And at that point I let go of block. And the reason the cylindrical thing is important is because it's an indication that the load trigger has been hit that loads the escape sequence at the end of the game, which normally you go through after you fight the boss. But by releasing block and basically releasing the airwalk, Cal is sent back to the med pad that he airwalked with, the bonfire that he tried to interact with, basically through all collision and everything like that. So he gets warped back to the bonfire outside of the boss arena, which normally you would be incapable of getting out of. And then I almost die because I try to go too fast on that bridge while it's moving. And that's pretty much the end of the game. We've skipped the final boss. We've gotten through the escape sequence with Vader, and we've gotten onto the elevator. The only thing left is to not clip out of the elevator, which on PS5 is really hard to do. But on other platforms, there's so many loading triggers in this elevator shaft that it can actually induce so much lag just by hitting the triggers that you clip through the floor of the elevator. We call that getting fished, after a member of our community named Fish People. So that is Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order all abilities on PlayStation 5. Time will end after we interact with this door up here and stab Vader. The reason that the time ends on the Vader stab instead of on the door interact, which is actually the final input, is because when the game released, there were QuickTime events in a lot of these cutscenes, and you couldn't disable them. So at the time of the game releasing, the final input was actually that stab right there. It was only in a later patch that they added a toggle to disable QuickTime events, which we all do as speedrunners because it's generally faster. But to preserve timing with old runs, the timing rules were maintained through that patch. But so that is the current world record of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order all abilities on PS5, 144.47. This was actually a pretty good run, even in derusts and other attempts that I've done since then, and this was a little bit over a year ago now. I haven't beaten this. So thanks very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it.